Morning, everybody. I'm Steve Delphin. I'm the President and CEO of America's Charities. And on behalf of the boards of America's Charities and those affiliated organizations, I do want to thank all of you for your commitment to America's Charities, both the member charities as well as our employer partners and others in the room who work with us. We know that we have to demonstrate our value to you guys every day and everything that we do. And we think through sessions like this, we're helping to do that. We are here to help you grow what you do at workplace giving and through employee engagement and through other forms of sustainable giving. And so that's our job, and hopefully this is a part of what helps you be able to do that. There actually is technically no business before the annual meeting, so I don't have to establish or require a quorum, so as long as that's okay with everybody. What I'd like to do, though, is kind of give you a state of the union and try to tee up the day's events, and I'll try to do that as quickly as I can, but I also want to give you a sense of the work that we have done and do on your behalf as member charities. If I say anything as I'm talking, particularly if you're new to us, a new member, I know we have an eclectic group of people in the room. I recognize that many of you have been with us and know us and are intimate with our service offerings and what we do, but I also know that there are quite a few of you here that may be totally new to this, maybe totally new to your job. So in the course of events today, there is no such thing as a dumb question. Literally, there's no such thing. And I say that because the environment that we're working in is changing just dramatically. Literally, day to day, things are changing in the world that we work in. And part of the reason we have sessions like this is to help you keep abreast of those changes, anticipate how they'll affect your job, and then our job is to help you be more effective in your job. So that's what we're trying to do today. So what I'd like to do is provide some business highlights since we met from this time last year. And if you have questions as we go along, they're technical. If you don't understand a technical term, just ask me. But if you could, hold the questions till the end. I'm going to have time at the end to ask any questions you have about what's happened in the past year, anything I may have said. So some things we have to do from a business perspective. So recently, on February 25th, the America's Charities Board approved the slate of renewing board directors and called for a vote by the membership to ratify that, and that was done by electronic vote. So the renewing directors for America's Charities are Brad Farmer, Janet Gibbs, George Weiner, Stacy Haller, and Randall Torre. If you go on our website, their bios are there. The way we do this is literally a ballot goes out to all of our member charities that are in America's Charities. We have to get a yes or no vote on the slate as a whole, and once we have a consensus on that from our membership, it stands. That's all occurred, so this is just a formality of letting you know that. In the area of governance, transparency, and sound financial management, I'm pleased to report that we earned another clean, independent financial management audit last year, which is always good news. We remain accredited by the Better Business Bureau Wise Giving Alliance, having met all 20 of their accountability standards. And in 2014, we achieved the GuideStar Gold status platform, which we're very proud of. We know a number of you in the room have that as well, and we encourage you to do that. A few additional highlights on the work we do on your behalf. We are continuing to work very hard to maintain and establish very strong ties in what we call the private sector, so corporate private sector workplaces. And in doing that, along with the work we do in the public sector, which are government campaigns, we were able to give you, our members, opportunities to participate last year in 1,300 events nationwide. So for those of you who value and take the time to participate in events, I think we do a top quality job in doing that. For those of you who'd like to learn more about what these opportunities are, Jeff Brown on our team is almost dedicated to that full time during campaign season, and I asked you to reach out to Jeff. Our advocacy work, and particularly in 13 and 14 to save the CFC, had a number of positive impacts. I'd like to say that it was a success in totality, but quite frankly, the Combined Federal Campaign has its challenges, and I'm going to talk about that shortly. But some of the things we did do, we were able to delay the implementation of some of the more onerous rule changes. We were able to get some provisions out of the new rules that we thought would really and truly damage the campaign further. There's a look-back provision that we helped get into the rules. Basically, they'll take a look after 3 years and look back and see if anything that they've implemented has had severe damage on the campaign. I can't promise you they'll do anything about it, but they'll at least look back and see if it did damage. Again, we'll talk about a little bit more about that later. And I want to take a second, because I think we might have some representation in the room from some of the other federations. Yeah, we're in a very competitive environment with the charities compete, the federations compete. We're all competing for kind of scarcity of resources. But around the CFC, the four major federations, ourselves, Earth Share, Global Impact, and Community Health Charities, really came together and worked very collaboratively and stomped all over Capitol Hill to try to make sure we were able to retain a combined federal campaign, more or less just grow it. I mean, the campaign was at risk of going away. And I will get back and talk about that in a little bit more later. In 2014, despite what we saw in the CFC, which you will know from your own results, the CFC was down this past year. On the private sector side, pledges to our member charities and campaigns that we manage actually are 5 to 10 times higher than what we see in campaigns that we don't. So we see tremendous potential in the private sector. And the percent of all pledges to America's charities in those managed campaigns, in other words, campaigns that we actually manage and have a relationship with the company in, the percentage of the pledges that go to our members has averaged 14% for the last 3 years, and that number is very, very strong. We continue to have a major role as convener and thought leader. We continue to do our research. The 2014 snapshot report called Rising Tide of Expectations. We had some of you may have been to the briefing we had at the National Press Club last year, and that received amazing top spin in social media, in the philanthropy media. We had coverage with GuideStar, CSR Wire, Huffington Post. 1,000 people have downloaded Snapshot from our website, many of them with employers. And speaking of social media presence, we've dramatically increased our footprint in that area. Let me just give you some stats the staff gave me. We have about 5,000 plus subscribers to our social networks and newsletters, an average of 1,500 web visitors per day, or 30 to 45,000 a month. For an organization that is kind of a backroom and intermediary organization, I think we've done a really good job of increasing our visibility and increasing our imprint on the narrative and the discussion that's going on in the marketplace. And I want to give a shout out to all of our speakers here today, because they are part of a network of people that we've gotten very close to who actually help extend and amplify our message in their own blogs and their own work. And they'll be talking about that as we go on through the day. We've been using channels such as LinkedIn and LinkedIn groups and 3BL to distribute our blogs. We're reaching about 250,000 journalists and corporate social responsibility professionals in that regard. And a lot of the work we are doing with you, which is taking the information as member charities about your programs and your services and your issues, and then re-amplifying that through our social media outreach, is beginning to have an effect on how you can get positioned in workplace giving programs. And again, our speakers today will talk about that and how you can better leverage that. Last year, we launched our High Performing Charities program and initiative, and I'll talk about that just a little bit more in a minute. We have launched our website. For those of you who visit our website, is new, more responsive, a little deeper and more robust in information and interactivity. And we continue to emphasize the diversification of our member charity revenues, particularly on the private sector side. And along those lines, we've had some breakthroughs recently with the technology companies that actually are out there running workplace giving campaigns. So there are many technology companies, probably a dozen, that actually have technology platforms. Ryan Scott with CauseCast is here with us today. Ryan owns one of those companies, who goes out and they work with companies to establish a workplace giving platform. We do that as well through Pledge First, but these are more sophisticated, more integrated and higher end platforms. And we've been having difficulty working with those companies to acquire the back end data on your behalf. But recently we've been having some breakthroughs, and we have with 3 of those companies recently, 3 of the large ones, they've agreed to start giving us the back end reports so that we can aggregate that data and information and present it to you in a format that is much easier for you to understand and consistent with how you've been getting the information from us in the past. We also have visions of trying to help present you through those platforms in a manner that you don't have to do it yourself for each of them. Now that's a phase 2 of this effort. So some of you who are actually working in that part of your business know that you're getting requests from technology platforms to populate their profiles with your information. What we're working to do is see if we can do that for you on behalf of you with those platforms. And we now have 3 of those platforms that are allowing us to do that. So that's all good news in the private sector, because that also helps you establish your presence in those campaigns. Even though we're not managing them, we can help make sure that your profiles and your information is as robust as possible. And then also be able to tell you, in addition to the campaigns we manage, what other campaigns are you in, and help you analyze the data and see if we can help you understand the data better to better leverage that participation. Finally, I'd just like to say this, our board of directors is highly engaged. We have a fairly large board, it's 21 members. It's a board of thirds, what I like to say, so about a third of them represent our member charities, a third represent employers or corporations, and a third are what I call content or other experts, so at-large people who can help us in specific areas of expertise. Now take that generally, it's not exactly 777, but that's the balance we try to keep. So today's meeting carries the title Engagement from Strategy to Success. I hope that's what it says up here, or it will say up here. We chose those words very carefully because the world of workplace philanthropy and giving has evolved very radically just in the last 5 years. I mean, I've been around workplace giving my entire career, either directly or indirectly, which spans more years than I'd like to admit. But it does go back all the way to the traditional United Way days, spans through the 90s when United Way came under lots of duress. You saw organizations such as ours begin to prosper in the private sector and continue to grow. But that private sector workplace giving campaign that many of us are familiar with, I say the crowd here is younger and younger, so you may not be as familiar with the type of campaigns that used to be run, but those campaigns were in the fall. They were directed towards a limited group of charities, usually the United Way, and were pretty rigid and often very top-down, coercive, and without choice. All of those things which typified a workplace giving campaign right up to the early 2000s have changed entirely. Campaigns are no longer just in the fall. They are year-round. They are no longer just about giving. They're about engagement. They're no longer just about a select targeted group of charities. They might be a strategic group that the company's aligning with, or it might be total open choice. And the reason I bring this out is that that is radically different from workplace giving in the public sector, which is regimented. It is driven by rules and regulations. Every single private sector workplace giving program is unique and different in its style, its structure, its size, and its intent. So the work on that side of the equation, where all the potential is actually a lot more difficult. But when you do it right, the outcomes are dramatically better than what you see currently on the public sector side. And that is why we're spending so much of our time and energy trying to help you all leverage your contacts, leverage the contacts we have, and leverage the information about how to work better in the private sector. So let me circle back and give you just a quick snapshot on what is going on with the combined federal campaign. Everybody in the room familiar with CFC? I would assume everybody knows what the CFC is. I characterize the problem with the combined federal campaign as twofold. Number one is, if you live in Washington, D.C. and you follow the federal workplace, you know that federal employees have really been through the ringer. Budget constraints, battles in Congress, all culminating with things like the government shutdown. People don't know if they're going to get paid. They don't know if they're going to get furloughed. Benefit reductions. I could go on and on. So imagine your own workforce operating in that environment and then somebody walking in and asking you to give money to charity. That's what's happening in the federal workplace. These are public servants who are, their DNA is about service. They have historically and for many years been the best donating public in the country. And literally since 2009, when the campaign peaked, we've seen participation rates drop like a rock and funds drop. So why is that? It's the reason we're here today to talk about engagement. Federal employees feel classically disengaged. There's a 2014 Federal Employee Viewpoint survey that OPM does, which is the Office of Personnel Management. They're the HR office for the federal government. And it shows a level of employee dissatisfaction that is unprecedented in the history of the federal government. I think Robin, didn't we go to a meeting last year where part of that survey was pointed out? I want to say 85% of all federal employees are actively looking for a job outside of the federal government, which doesn't bode well since 50% of all federal employees will be eligible to retire in 2017. So at the same time, that same study says the federal employee doesn't trust the leadership of the agency it works for. Okay, why don't they trust it? Because the leaders of these agencies are all political appointees. Oftentimes, the political appointees come and go, and unfortunately in this environment, half the federal agencies have no leadership because nobody can get through Congress to get appointed. So in general, the atmosphere among the employees in the federal government is they are not happy campers. And so this spills over into things like CFC. Second, and I think just as damaging, and maybe even more so, because you could take all these things we talk about in employee engagement and apply them in a way that could help the federal employee. We've talked to the Office of Personnel Management about this. The Office of Personnel Management is stone deaf. Their agenda is not to raise more money, as they've said publicly. Their agenda, unfortunately, is to run the campaign as cheaply as possible. That's one thing that's wrong with the campaign. We've tried hard to get the federal government to see that that's a problem, and we will continue to do so, but the current staff and administration at OPM does not seem to have any interest in that. They want to just run the campaign as cheaply as possible. Secondly, and I will tell you how long I've been around this stuff, in the 40 years I've been around workplace giving, and I'm not going to say my political affiliation because it doesn't really matter, but this is the first administration that has not publicly supported the CFC. And it's unfortunate, and it's a kind of out of kilter with what you would think. But this is the first administration that hasn't gone to the federal employee and said the CFC is important. We think you should participate in it. We haven't had a message from the president. I believe the First Lady did a radio thing a couple years ago, but it's been an odd disconnect with the administration and the White House on this. And we've been working the back channels to try to bring this to their attention, and hopefully we'll be able to as we go forward. So these two things, disengaged federal workforce and the Office of Personnel Management and the White House, which seem to not be focused on the CFC, leads us to the conclusion that the CFC is what it is. It's not going to bounce back. It is going to continue to be where it is and go up and down slightly. Hopefully some of the changes will make it a little better, but in your planning, when you sit with us as staff and however you look at it, the combined federal campaign is going to be not a growth market. It's going to, unless you want to approach it from the perspective of how do I gain market share of a market that is not growing. And we can talk to you about ways to do that as we counsel you. In the private sector, on the other hand, and our snapshot report from last year shows this, there's a number of trends, and we're going to be talking about those in today's session. So let me just run through some of them. Some of those trends into the focus areas for today's session. In the face of those rising expectations that we have, that people have of charities around transparency, accountability, impacts, outcomes, charities are going to have to respond to corporate and institutional and individual donors who are starting to demand those things. And why are they demanding it? Because they have more access to more information, the democratization of data and information that makes it easier for donors and grantors, institutions, foundations, corporations, to look at and make determinations about which charities perhaps are doing better than others. Technology, digital culture, data, and analytics are going to transform the way that nonprofit organizations interact with the companies, with your customers, with your employees, with your stakeholders. We're going to talk about that today. We have some data and analytic monsters in the room who are going to be talking to us about that. Workplace giving, as I mentioned before, is moving to a broader engagement model. This is going to provide you as the charities more opportunities for employees to learn about and interact with you, but it's going to take more work. And again, learning how to work with companies who, by the way, don't know how to work with you that well. I mean, the disconnect that we found when we did our research was the expectations that companies have of the nonprofit sector and the expectations that the nonprofit sector have of companies. There's places where that connects, but more often than not, there are these big disconnects. we actually ran into a situation in our soft research where a certain nonprofit actually created volunteer opportunities for a corporation that was very close to it to come in and do employee kind of group volunteer activity that they did repetitively, even though it didn't need to happen. I'm not going to name the institution, but they build stuff, okay? And they did that strategically because they said they wanted to keep the relationship with the company, and that's what the company wanted to do. They wanted to have these group activities for its employees. But at the end of the day, was there a better way to develop a stronger relationship between those two organizations? There probably was. Partnerships are key. Charities recognize the value of partnering with companies, but they're challenged to sustain those partnerships. How many of you have had cause-related marketing programs with companies? Raise hands. Or sponsorships. How many have seen those sponsorships which you thought were solid go away after a couple of years because of a change in staff at the company? So making those things stickier and sustainable is very, very difficult. But there are ways to do that, to ingrain yourself deeper into the company culture. So in the agenda, you're going to see that our sessions and speaker align with all these trends. And as part of our agenda with you is we try to align you with and connect you with in kind of an intimate discussion format like today with experts who can help you navigate all these issues in the marketplace and provide you with insights and actionable takeaways and outcomes that you can use directly when you go back home. And so I'm proud to say that today's speakers and panel rosters include a group of folks that we at America's Charities are familiar with. We've heard them all speak. They're all dynamic. And let me get you jazzed up a little bit about who we have here. And some of these people I've already introduced. As I said before, from Price Waterhouse, we have Heather Lofgren-Wright, and she's in their corporate responsibility office, and Heather's bio's in your work there in your folders. Emily Simone is Lockheed's Director of Global Community Outreach, and she's a Community First Charities Board Director. And by the way, Heather's on the America's Charities Board. We have with us Chris Jarvis. Chris, where are you? There he is, right there. Chris, he's Senior Partner and Co-Founder of Realized Worth. They're a consulting firm and known for their leading thinking around modern employee engagement and volunteerism. Ryan Scott, who there he is right there. Ryan's founder and CEO at CauseCast. They're a technology company on the leading, I'm reading this right from your website, right? On the leading edge of employee engagement, workplace giving. Ryan's a prodigious blogger, creative thinker in this space. Anthony Shop, is Anthony with us yet? There you are, hey Anthony. Anthony's Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of Social Driver, a digital innovation agency. And Anthony was just cited in the Washington Business Journal, I saw this, as one of the 40 under 40 leaders to watch in Washington. So congratulations, Anthony. Do you have that on a t-shirt yet? Do you? No? Okay, just wanted to make sure. From two of America's Charities members, we have Chris Brooks, who's Manager of Individual Giving at Share Our Strength. Chris? Is Chris here yet? Okay. And Stéphane Decloux, who's Grant Officer for the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. They'll be talking about how to leverage data and information to spread awareness and understanding about your organization. And again, also with us is Perla Nee, who's founder and CEO of Great Nonprofits, a leading web destination where people share their reviews and comments about charity. So think Yelp for nonprofits, literally, and a leader. There she is back there, I just spotted her. And finally, as I said before, we have all the America's Charity staff is here. So let me just, for those of you who joined us last year, you might recall, and I think I've said it here, that I think we're in the midst of a real sea change. And I think that's happening because despite the mega gifts we see and despite the billion-dollar types of givers we see, there really is an emerging scarcity overall for resources in the nonprofit sector. And I know most of you who work day to day in your development offices feel that. It's just harder, and it's much more competitive. Those of you who rely on state or federal funding are seeing that those funds are getting fewer, and the funds that remain are going to be more competitive. They're going to be based on evidence-based outcomes. The Office of Management Budget has actually put that into the grant-making guidelines, and over the next 5 years, you will find all federal grants going to nonprofits are going to transition into an evidence-based outcome approach. So you're going to need to be able to provide evidence that your programs work, are sustainable, and are scalable. And that's all coming. So for lack of a better term, being best in class or perceived as best in class, however that is in your field, is going to become increasingly important. That combined with the increased expectations around accountability and transparency, it is going to become a much more competitive market for both mind and market share. And we're seeing that in the corporate philanthropy offices, where those departments, which are interestingly understaffed and under-budgeted often, given the size of the companies, are increasingly being pressed to demonstrate their value as a cost center to the company in rolling up what they do in terms of the impact that they have to the business model. So that's a different dynamic than even when I was doing that. I was the head of CSR for Booz Allen. When I was doing it there, it was really more about doing well by doing good. Now it's much more than that. It is no longer checkbook philanthropy, and that's changing everything on the corporate side. It's not to say that you still can't have those kinds of relationships, but generally speaking, every bit of resource you get from a company is going to have to be strategically aligned with something the company is trying to do, either around employee engagement or around an issue that is important to them. So on the corporate side, we're seeing that they are struggling with their legacy giving efforts and trying to connect that to broader CSR. On the nonprofit side, we're seeing charities that they're trying to diversify their funding and view companies as prospective supporters and partners with that, but the research is showing that there's a disconnect with how that happens. I think there will be winners and losers. I know those in the nonprofit sector don't want to hear this, but I think we are going to see mergers, acquisitions in the nonprofit sector. I think that's a good thing. I think you're going to see the steepness of the growth in a number of charities level off and maybe even start to decline. As the marketplace won't allow for repetition and duplication of services and programs, and as those that can provide evidence that what they do works rise to the top, and those that can't won't. We've been involved in the debate about what impact is at America's Charities. So our High Performing Charities program is designed to begin to help you understand how to play in that world. Our feeling is that impact, despite what experts might say, can't be specifically defined by a single formula. Richard Neusteiner and I were just having this conversation over breakfast. There's a body of people out there who think that there is an algorithm that takes you to impact, and I would propose that that's nonsense, because impact for one type of organization is different from another, and how you get there can vary. And what we're trying to do is identify the various ways you can get to impact and say that by doing that, we can create impact. You can as a charity, we can as an intermediary, but it doesn't have to be through a specific formula. So we've made a lot of progress there. We've partnered with GuideStar, Independent Sector, Better Business Bureau, and have been pushing out to you the Charting Impact program, which I know many of you are participating in, which we think is a good thing because that's part of an indication of impact. So we think of it more as a series of indicators of impact. And again, there'll be more coming to you about this, and we want to talk to you more about how you can participate that, because ultimately what we want to create is a group of high-performing charities that we can label as such and present that to the marketplace. Actually, last year when we met, we had 5 of our member charities, I think, that met the high-performing charity standard, and 13 had gotten Gold Star status in GuideStar, and today we have 17 with 37 in Gold Star, which is good movement, given the fact that we've been doing that in a pilot and a soft rollout phase. So in your handout materials, you're going to find a complete description. If you open your well, not, you don't have to open your package, but in your package, you'll find all of our member services. We've rolled out a number of new services this year, including a set of consultative services that are in addition to what you get for membership. Those are things like helping you design your cause marketing programs, helping you think through your workplace giving strategies. Separate and distinct. If you have interest in that, when you read through it, give us a call, talk to us here. We can talk to you more about that. And just overall, we see a changing marketplace that just has fantastic opportunities. But it's going to be different than it was in the past. It's going to be more challenging, but in many ways it's going to be much more productive, because the marketplace is going to demand that you create partnerships that have value both ways. It's going to demand that those partnerships and alliances be deep and robust and not shallow. And it's going to demand that you be thoughtful in your own shops and more integrated in your thinking about how you work with employers and companies. And it's actually going to demand that you look at your individual donors a little differently. I will tell you a story about one of our member charities. that's not in the room, so I can say it, but I'm not going to say who they were, who for years were taking the donor files that we were giving them from the private sector workplace giving campaigns. So these are donors who are giving $250, $300, $500, $700, $1,000, $1,200 a year or more. And they were taking those names and dumping them into their annual giving file, and then soliciting them at the end of the year, and effectively turning a $1,000 donor into a $25 donor. That was because there was not a lot of, the dollars raised in workplace giving were looked at as kind of found money. And I would imagine a lot of you kind of look at that as found money. It's easy money. You don't have to do any work for it. But on the other side of that, there's data and there's information attached to that money that you haven't done a good job using, we haven't done a good job helping you. And that's one of the things that we're promising to do. And one of the sessions we have today is to begin to help you understand how to leverage the data and the information so you can find those clusters of donors who might be volunteers in a local market. So you can find that group of volunteers who might become donors if you get them to advocate for you in the workplace.